What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue here with my 2024 college football schedule preview and projected record series. The Wake Forest Deacons are up next, and before we preview their schedule for 2024 and give them an early projected record based on how tough their schedule is, let's take a look back at what Wake Forest did in 2023. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Wake Forest. My projection had them at 5-7, and then my prediction for them was 7-5. But Wake Forest going just 4-8 last year in 2023. So yeah, it was kind of a bit of a disappointment for Wake Forest, and also a pretty rough year at the same time here for the Deacons as well. Again, not even making it to a bowl game last year. Again, going just 4-8 in 2023. This was the schedule last year for Wake Forest, and you look at who they played in the non-conference. They played Elon, Vanderbilt, Old Dominion on the road, and then, of course, Notre Dame on the road as well. So they won their 3 non-conference games in the first 3 weeks, and then, of course, lost to Notre Dame there in the later part of November. Obviously, that wasn't a very horrible non-conference schedule, but when you had to play Notre Dame on there, it made the non-conference schedule a little bit tougher. Then, obviously, you look at the losses coming in the ACC. They lost to Georgia Tech, Clemson, Virginia Tech, Florida State, Duke, NC State, and then of course Syracuse here. So they started out 3-0, and this is the schedule, and this is where the schedule got really tougher for them. Again, just going 4-8 with only 1 win last year in the conference play against Pittsburgh here on October 21st. So let's now look ahead to 2024. Here is the schedule for Wake Forest, and before we go game by game, let's take a look at who they will play in the non-conference for this upcoming season. So you look at their non-conference schedule, they will play North Carolina A&T, an FCS team right there, and then they'll play Ole Miss, Louisiana, and then UConn here on the road. So they will play Ole Miss, of course, out of the SEC, that game in week number 3. Last year, Ole Miss played Georgia Tech, but this year they'll play Wake Forest out of the ACC. And for Wake Forest, they played Vanderbilt last year, but this time it will be Ole Miss, so that'll be a very tough game there, but the good news is they get that game at home. So that's your non-conference schedule. It's not a very tough non-conference schedule, but when you got Ole Miss there in the SEC, that's going to make the non-conference schedule a little bit tougher. So let's now go back to the schedule here for 2024. They start things off, of course, with a Thursday night game against North Carolina A&T, again an FCS team. Again, that game will be on a Thursday night. Then they'll open up conference play here the next week, rather early here in the month of September. They'll play Virginia here on September 7th. That'll be a home game there for the Deacons. And then they play Ole Miss, of course, here on September 14th. That's the big non-conference game here in week number 3. And then they get a bye week after that game here in the month of September. They do play Louisiana here at home coming out of the bye week on September 28th, and that's kind of a weird spot for a bye week before playing like a non-conference game that you're going to be really absolutely favored in. You'd rather have the bye week right before that Ole Miss game, to be honest, if you're a Wake Forest fan, but either way, it is what it is. And then going into the month of October, they play NC State here on the road on October 5th. Then it's back at home for Clemson here on October 12th. And then they go on the road to play UConn on October 19th in their other non-conference game. And then on the road here at Stanford on October 26th. So they got back-to-back road games there with UConn and Stanford. Stanford, of course, now a newcomer in the ACC. And then in the month of November, they get a bye week in that first weekend of the month of November before playing California here on November 8th. That game, of course, will be on a Friday, of course. And then they play North Carolina here on the road on November the 16th. Then on the road here at Miami on November 23rd. So back-to-back road games there with North Carolina and Miami on November 16th and November 23rd. That is obviously a very tough back-to-back road game trip there for Wake Forest. And then they close things out, of course, with Duke here at home on November 30th. So that is the schedule here for Wake Forest for the upcoming season. So this is a pretty tough schedule here for Wake Forest. It's not horrible, but, you know, it is a tough schedule when you got Ole Miss in there in the non-conference. You got some tough road games with NC State, North Carolina, and Miami. Again, Miami and North Carolina are back-to-back road games. You get Clemson and Ole Miss, though, both at home at least. I think those are your 2 toughest home games here on this schedule. The good news is, also, you don't have to play Louisville or Florida State here on this schedule this year, which is the good news here for this Wake Forest team. So let's now get a projection here for Wake Forest for 2024. This is the scale that I'll be using here for this projection. If it's a 1% game in the red, that percentage is going to count as an automatic loss, and then your 20% games here in the orange are going to be games where Wake Forest will be a double-digit underdog. Then your 40% 50% games here in the yellow are going to be games where Wake Forest will be a clear underdog game by about a touchdown. Then 50-50 games, of course, will stay in the white, games I think can really go either way. Then your 60% games here in the purple are going to be games where Wake Forest will be favored by about a touchdown. Then your 80% games here in the blue are going to be games where Wake Forest will be favored by double digits. And then the 99% games here in the green are pretty much your easy wins and also automatic wins there in that percentage. So we'll start with the easy wins and also automatic wins here on this schedule for Wake Forest. I think you got two easy wins on here, North Carolina A&T and then of course Louisiana here in the non-conference. North Carolina A&T is definitely one of the easiest games here on this schedule in the non-conference for the Demon Deacons. They'll be favored by more than 3 touchdowns in that game, and that definitely is a game that's over 95%. So Wake Forest absolutely has no business to lose that game. And then Louisiana, I was very close to putting Louisiana in the blue, but I'm going to stick with it here and put it in the green for right now. Louisiana's not a bad group of 5 team out of the Sun Belt, so I don't really expect that one to be a blowout. But either way, Wake Forest is playing at home in this game, and that's the reason why this is in the green. These are not guaranteed wins for Wake Forest, but either way, I think Wake Forest will be favored by more than 3 touchdowns. But they're counted as automatic wins here in this projection. So those are 2 easy wins. And then I got one game on here where I think Wake Forest is going to be a double-digit favorite here by a couple touchdowns, and that's going to be the game here on the road at UConn on October 19th in their other non-conference game. UConn's not a pretty good football program, but either way, this is a road game, and that's the reason why this ended up being a favorite here for Wake Forest by 10 to 14 points, by a couple touchdowns here in the blue by double digits here as well. That's the reason why this turned out to be a blue game instead of a green game. I would definitely put it in the green if it was at home for Wake Forest, but either way, I think Wake Forest will be favored here by double digits here against UConn. They definitely have the more talented roster compared to UConn either way, so that's also counted as a win. Again, these green games and also blue games are not guaranteed wins, but again, either way, they're still counted as wins here in this projection. And I don't have any purple games on here for Wake Forest, but let's go to the games now where I think Wake Forest will be underdogs in. I don't have any automatic losses on here in the red for Wake Forest, but I do have 3 games on here where I think Wake Forest will be double-digit underdogs by 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. And those 3 games are going to be NC State, North Carolina, Miami. All 3 of these games are on the road. NC State's a very tough place to play. NC State obviously considered to be a top 25 team, and also definitely a dark horse contender in the ACC, to be honest. They had a pretty good year last year. And then North Carolina, Miami, back-to-back road games. I think Wake Forest will be double-digit underdogs in both of those games. North Carolina could probably take a step back from where they were a year before. Miami definitely should be a lot better than they were from last year. This team is absolutely loaded on the roster. But either way, I think Wake Forest will be double-digit underdogs. The reason why both of these games turn out to be double-digit underdogs here for Wake Forest is just because they're both on all on the road here in these 3 games. So I think Wake Forest will be double-digit underdogs in all 3 of these road games, again by 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. And then we go to the games where I think Wake Forest will be a clear underdog in by about a touchdown, by 6, 7, 8 points, somewhere in that range. I got 2 games on here in the yellow, Ole Miss and Clemson. These are 2 home games here for Wake Forest. I think there'll be a clear underdog in both of these games. These are likely, upset alert type games here for Wake Forest. If Ole Miss was ranked in the top 10, and let's say Clemson's probably ranked somewhere in the top 25, both of these teams are very tough games. I think either way, Wake Forest will be clear underdogs in both of these games. The reason why they turn out to be in the yellow is just because they're both at home, and also the talent level does go to Ole Miss, or I should say the talent advantage does go to Ole Miss and Clemson here. Both of these games are definitely, are very winnable games here for Wake Forest. They'll definitely be clear underdogs in both of those games. So, again, 6, 7, 8 point underdogs in both of those games against Ole Miss and Clemson. And then you got 4 games on here that are pretty much 50-50 games on here for Wake Forest, Virginia, Stanford, California, and Duke. All these games can definitely go either way. Virginia definitely is a home game here for Wake Forest. I probably would favor the Demon Deacons by about a touchdown, but this is a tough one to call here. Virginia might be a little bit better than they were from last year. And then Stanford and Cal, 2 newcomers here in the ACC. We don't know how good both of these teams are going to be, but I think either way, those are pretty even matchups as well. And then, of course, Duke here at home. That's a pretty even matchup, even though Duke's going to have a first-year head coach. But again, this is based off of where the teams were from last year. And again, 4 games I think can go either way. Again, Virginia, Stanford, California, and Duke. Those are my 50-50 games here for Wake Forest. So let's now get a projected record here for Wake Forest for 2024. year. Again, this is not my official prediction. This is simply a projection based on how tough the schedule is. So we kind of couple those green games as automatic wins, and then you count that one blue game as a slight win, and then you average out those 3 games here in the orange at 20%, and then you average out a couple of those yellow games here at 40%, then you average out these 50-50 games here at 50%, and the overall projected record for Wake Forest is going to be 5-7 here for 2024. So a 5-7 projection, same projection as last year here for me for this Wake Forest team. Kind of hard to tell how good this team is going to be just based off of where they were from last year, but I think either way they'll have a better year this year. I think they'll be more competitive than they were from last year as well. But again, 5-7 is the projection, just coming up just short of a bowl game. It wouldn't really shock me if Wake Forest did make it to a bowl game this year just compared to where they were from last year. This is definitely a consistent program in the ACC, so I think they'll definitely have a better year this year. But if they go 4-8 or 3-9 or worse, this definitely will be another big disappointment here for Wake Forest. But again, 5-7 is the projection here for Wake Forest for 2024. Give me your thoughts on this Wake Forest team down in the comments below. What do you think their projected record is for 2024? Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports channel.